Greetings and welcome. I am JustaVOR, bringing you what I hope is constructive information on what the system of white supremacy, racism, is and how it works, as well as what can be done to replace it with the system of justice. In this video, we will be reviewing a documentary entitled Whitewashed, Unmasking the World of Whiteness, as directed by Mark Patrick George, suspect. Hopefully we will be able to answer questions like, what does it mean to be white in a system of white supremacy, by studying the interactions that white people have with one another. And in doing so, maybe even ascertain an answer to the question proposed by Dr. Francis Quest Welsing: what do white people talk about when no non-white people are around? In this documentary, you may see some white people that you recognize and some that you don't. One thing that I am pretty sure we will find is deception, confusion, outright lies, but maybe, hopefully, we will find some constructive information. So without further pause, let's have a look at Whitewashed, Unmasking the World of Whiteness.
I don't have any trouble admitting that I'm a racist. I think it's absurd to try to fight with that. I grew up in this society. I was conditioned by it. I think internally in my psyche, I've grounded and rooted those attitudes, and I see it in me all the time.
I don't like being a white man, and that's where I still am in working on it, because I know what I've done, what people like me have done.
Part of being white is just not in any way acknowledging what it means to be white.
I have a white skin, and that with that white skin comes along a whole mess of privileges that I have, and I don't ask for them, they just are there.
You have started to break the code of silence a little bit when you start talking about white people and you start talking about this stuff.
That's interesting. What we can see here from the very beginning, it appears that this documentary is to make white people feel more comfortable with speaking openly about being white, which I have no problem with. I think that if non-white people want to understand how the system of racism works, then we need to know what it means to be white in a system of white supremacy. And I don't think anyone is going to be able to give us more insight as to that as much as those classified as white. But I do detect some deception here. This concept that having white skin is what makes a person white. No one has white skin. If you look at some of our previous videos about where do white people come from, we go into the genetic theories as it pertains to melanin content. But one thing is for sure, no one has white skin. And if that was a factor as to how people are classified racially, then an albino person with two black parents could be, based on their skin alone, classified as a white person. But that is not the case. They would have skin paler than most white people, but they are not classified as white because of their skin tone. So let's clear that up immediately. But there's something interesting that this suspect says. And he said that when you speak about being white in a system of white supremacy, you start to unlock the code of silence. And that is how white people are able to continue practicing racism, by keeping non-white people confused because they don't share constructive information so that we understand what we need to do to end the system. Let's continue.
And you find yourself suddenly all alone.
Interesting title. Here's another question. What is whiteness? What does that even mean? For over a decade, I have been talking to white people about racism and what it is like to be a quote-unquote white person. Drawing from those that would speak with me, this video shares some of what they had to say.
The family history, as I understand it, was really, people coming to America as a way of searching for a better life and escaping poverty. And it has often seemed to me that also meant escaping their roots, where they came from, that there was a sort of a desire to separate from that and to become something different.
Okay. Again, it's interesting that they start here with immigrants coming over from Europe to a place where there was already a system of racism, white supremacy already established for centuries before these European immigrants came over. There were already white people here. They had already classified themselves as white. They had already classified others as non-white, and they'd already began dominating the non-white people and taking up the resources in the land. And these immigrants from Europe came over by choice. Many of them, we know some of them came over as part of a penal system, but many of these immigrants they're speaking of came over by choice to benefit from a system of white supremacy, the system that was already established before they got here. I just think that it's interesting to start out with these people who came from Europe, who chose to come here in poverty to benefit from the system of white supremacy. And one of the first steps in doing so is to identify as white and be accepted amongst other white people. Where did white people come from?
It means that I have Scotch-Irish ancestry with a little bit of German. I'm European, and I came over 250 years ago.
My ancestors are from England and Germany.
My ancestors are German and Russian and Scottish.
In my father's side, it was Irish, and my mother's side, it was probably English, but I don't know a lot about her side.
I'm French Indian. I guess you'd say I got a little Cajun in me.
Ireland. So you identify as Irish?
No, not really. I identify as an American.
Interesting point. He has Irish ancestry, but he identifies as an American. American would be his nationality, which I think is interesting because the question is, where do white people come from? And the director apparently asked these individuals where they came from or where their ancestors came from. And the typical response was things like, oh, my ancestors were Irish, they were British, they were Italian, they were German. These would be considered nationalities as well, including with being an American. So to gain a definitive, concise answer on where do white people come from just by asking these suspects, I'm confused. I don't even understand why they responded the way they responded. But let's continue.
British, Scotch-Irish. Scotch, that's where my ancestors are from, supposedly, but hasn't had any impact on me. Doesn't mean anything.
I think pilgrims. When I think of where did I come from, I think pilgrims, but no, but I'm sure somewhere down the line I am.
Because they were Irish, there was a lot of oppression, you know, because they immigrated over from Ireland. So I thought a lot about what that was like for them as Irish people, but I never thought about what it was like for them and when they became white.
I remember when Noel Ignatieff visited the Context of White Supremacy radio program with Gus T. Renegade. Noel Ignatieff wrote the book, How the Irish Became White. And it basically illustrated a process where white people will come over from Europe, and in order to get on the white team, they would have to demonstrate that they were willing to do what it took to maintain and refine the system of white supremacy. So not only did they have to identify with white people, but they had to act like white people. So again, what does it mean to be a white person in a system of white supremacy? How would one group who was not initially accepted as white, who were considered non-white and mistreated like they were non-white, how they were then able to be converted into white people? This question is important because this process still happens today. Previously, we've seen it happen with the Irish, those identify as Italian, those who identify as Jewish, who initially were considered not white, but who are pretty much accepted as white people today, and they play pretty well for the white team. But we also see it with the influx of those who are considered so-called Hispanics, and even those who are considered Arab, you know, kind of like on this probation to see if they can make the cut to be on the white team, or if they will ultimately be considered non-white. I just thought it was interesting they keep taking this story of Irish immigrants coming over, being mistreated. But I do think that it is important, an important aspect of the story to highlight. So here we see the question, how did your ancestors get turned into quote unquote white people?
Well, you can only be something if there's something else to negate it. So I guess we became white. I guess we're white because there's a bunch of other races to set us off.
So how did English people...
That's interesting. You have to be something when there's something else to negate it. What did he just say? Does that make sense to anyone else? My theory is that white people, those who classify themselves as white, they went out into the world. They seen that there was an abundance of people all around the world who were melanin enriched, and they noticed that they were outnumbered. So this goes into Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory of color confrontation, as written about in her book, The ISIS Papers. These white people knew that they were outnumbered by people with melanin, and they decided that in order to protect their phenotype, they would form an organization, a group, and they called it white. And this became a so-called race. By default, if they're the white people, then everyone else is considered non-white. So I don't think that there were other races. I support the theory that there's only one race, that is the white race.
German people get turned into white people.
America?
By assimilation, by living, by living in the U.S. It's just the smorgasbord, you know.
I have no idea. I honestly have no idea.
Do you know how they got turned into British and Scott people? How those people got turned into white people?
No.
Have you ever thought about that?
I'm not a history buff.
I think culture did that over time. It's like certain words that we use in our language are not our words. They're other nations, other words that come from other languages.
How did the Irish...
That's interesting. No one else seems to know how their ancestors, regardless of what country or what tribe or whatever that they came from in Europe, how did they get turned into white people over here? No one seems to know. One guy says, well, I'm not a history buff. But I don't think you necessarily have to be an expert in history. You don't have to be a history buff to see a pattern of behavior that those people who were attempting to become part of the white team mistreated others who had more melanin than they did. And we know that in the system of white supremacy, the opposite of white is black. If white is going to be at the top, black has to be at the bottom. Now, you may not be black, but you're not white either. So you would go somewhere in the middle. And some of those middle classified people could be brought into the white team, but they would have to prove themselves. And how would they prove themselves? By mistreating black people and the indigenous melanated peoples of the land, the so-called Native Americans. But usually it's siding with the white team and supporting them. That is how these groups became identified as white. They had to mistreat black people.
Irish get turned into white people?
That's a good question.
I think a lot of it was early assimilation in the United States, a lot of European ethnics coming over, assimilating for a variety of reasons. Primary one being a desire to elevate their socioeconomic status. So to get jobs, to find places to live. A lot of the Europeans altered their last names to sound more mainstream. A lot of them changed the clothing that they wore, the foods they ate. So there was this, some might call it assimilation. I think of it more as Anglo-conformity, conforming to this kind of dominant white culture.
But the reality is that those persons who are white and who are considered white and treated as such in this society, by virtue of being white and treated that way, have had to give up who they really were. If they were Russian American, my father's side of the family, grandfather's side, great-grandfather came here from Russia in 1910. He had to give up what it meant to be a Jew, a Russian Jew from Eastern Europe, to become an American, which really meant to become white. The Irish had to do the same thing. The Italians had to do the same thing. The Greeks had to do the same thing. All these European ethnics who were not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants had to give up their actual identities for the sake of whiteness.
I see Tim Wise, and he has a point. He speaks quite accurate about how the system of white supremacy works when it comes to explaining certain aspects. But if you're familiar with Tim Wise, an admitted white supremacist, admitted racist, admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise. If you're familiar with him in any way, and if you use a counter-racist lens, you can see through his deceptions as well. But when it comes to speaking about racism, white supremacy, he knows how to use that vocabulary. I will give him that.
You know, I really didn't think about being white, I'd say, growing up, because mainly, I think because I was part of the majority and I maybe wasn't forced to think about it.
There we go. What does it mean to be white? Let's just get down to the nitty gritty.
I don't think it means anything. It's just, some people might think it means better, but to me it doesn't mean anything but just the color of my skin, really.
Word. Are you guys buying that? It doesn't mean anything, but it means the color of her skin. Some people say it means better, superior. But to her, it doesn't mean anything but the color of her skin. Is she white-skinned? What do you guys think?
How often do you think about being white?
Not very often. I really don't think about it a lot at all.
You don't have to.
It's just me.
Racially, do you see yourself as a white person?
No, I see myself as a person.
So you ever think about being a white person?
No.
You guys buying that? Do you ever think about being a white person? It doesn't come up job applications, any other kind of forms. When you have a child and you mark down that racial category that they're going to belong to, they're going to identify with, when you have to sign up for school or put your child in school or any of those things, that you don't ever think about being white. Never. You identify as a person. You're a human. It reminds me of those people who say things like, there's only one race. That's the human race. But those people are, I've not seen any of these people put human down when they ask what race they are. I've not seen it written on any forms. I don't see it in the Census Bureau. I don't see anyone fighting to have human added to the Census Bureau as a racial classification. So I ask again, are you guys believing this suspected race soldier when they say they don't ever think about being white? They don't identify as white. Do you believe them when they say white doesn't mean anything? Are you buying that?
Probably not very often.
Not really. Sometimes I got a lot of black friends. Sometimes we make jokes about it and everything, but
Not really. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm white, pink, or purple, or black. I don't care.
depends on the social situation. Sometimes I'll be the only white person in the room when it's reversed, when the tables are sort of flipped.
How do you identify racially? Do you see yourself as a white man?
I think that everybody is equal in the eyes of the Lord.
So you don't see yourself as a white person?
Not as much as most people. I think when it's all said and done, we're equal, and definitely inside and outside. But I don't.
Deception detected. He had to ask him that question twice. First time he says he think we're all equal in the eyes of the Lord. He had to ask him again. He didn't even answer the question directly. Deception. Master deceivers, as Mr. Fuller would say.
I don't know if I ever considered myself white or thought about it. At one point I'm sure I did, but I don't really have any recollection of when it was, which I think is a total reflection of whiteness, of never having to sort of contemplate why people treat you the way they do.
To be white means to be a member of a dominant racial group in a society that I consider white supremacist. And to be white in a white supremacist society, not just a racist society, because that's almost too generic. To be white in a white supremacist society is to be able to have the luxury of oblivion, to be oblivious to the injustices, to be oblivious to racial privilege, to be oblivious, frankly, to one's own identity. So it is, in a sense, to be invisible to oneself.
Tim Wise speaks pretty accurately about racism, white supremacy, but the deception comes where this guy can be accepted by non-white people as being some kind of all-truth-saying savior. He has to speak at all these events. My university invited him last year to come to a diversity conference. He was one of the keynote speakers there. And I remember he went on the Cows radio program, and he didn't want to disclose how much he got paid for doing all these speaking engagements, where there's so many non-white people who are just as experienced in speaking about racism, who could speak just as eloquently about the system of white supremacy. But they don't get chosen. These white organizations, these white groups seem to feel more comfortable choosing other white people to speak about racism to white and black audiences. And even black organizations will invite people like Tim Wise, admitted white supremacist, who doesn't go around telling people he's a white supremacist outright. You kind of have to pull that out of him, you have to ask him, and he'll give it an answer by default. There's a lot of things that Tim Wise says that he copies from other non-white people, other black scholars, and people who've attempted to counter white supremacy over the decades. He copies a lot of their information without giving them credit as well. So, yeah, to be expected.
Well, I think to be white in this culture means to deny the reality of racism. And it means to deny the privilege that we have as whites. Most people who are whites don't want to accept that they are privileged because they are.
Here's the concept of white privilege being put out there. But here's the question. What does it mean to be white in a system of white supremacy? What does it require a person to do? That's really what's at the heart of the question. As far as feelings and as far as the benefits that they get from being white, and I wouldn't call it white privilege. I mean, what creates white privilege, right? Would it not be white power? So, again, we are trying to find out exactly what a person would need to do in order to be accepted as a white person among other white people. Let's see if any of these suspected racists are going to be any help answering the question.
People don't want to talk about being white because they know that at a deep level, even though they haven't even, some of them may not have ever talked about it with anybody or ever expressed it, they do know that they get a benefit from being white.
What is it like to be white?
If you're white in this country, there's certain advantages that come your way, and it doesn't really matter whether you want to or not, or whether you're in touch with it or not.
Now I know there are privileges that I enjoy simply because I'm white.
Every minute of my life, I'm aware of my white privilege, of the fact that I have a white skin, and that with that white skin comes along a whole mess of privileges that I have, and I don't ask for them, they just are there.
There's the white skin deception again, to go along with this white privilege deception. And I say deception because this doesn't even get to the heart of how white supremacy works. And I laughed at the question of what is it like to be white? Yeah, let's talk about all the goodies that you get from being classified as white in a system without actually having to talk about the role you play in maintaining the system. It's not like your ancestors from hundreds of years ago set up the system and you just happened to be born and inherited and didn't have to do anything for it. There has been a clear line, a historical line of events that happened that contribute to each generation of white people maintaining their white power all the way to the current generation. And those white people will tell you that their parents and their grandparents did some racist things. There was racism back in the day, but not as bad as today. Or they will try to some way exclude themselves from the practice of white supremacy in an effort to maintain refine and or expand the system. But that is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get past the deception. We're trying to get past the confusion. And I would like for any of these white people to just tell it like it is. I don't think that's going to happen looking at the way it's been going, but let's continue to watch.
Things that come to me, that belong to me, that I'm given and that I expect just because I'm white, that I never wonder about, ask about, discuss. And that's the power of it, is that the privilege of expecting that I'm going to go to good schools and that I'm going to have choices no matter what, that there will always be a choice that will be probably pretty reasonable, that will work out pretty well for me.
To me, it's about privilege. A lot of people get to walk around thinking that we live in a meritocracy and thinking that their own hard work is the only thing that's, responsible for their achievements. I think that it means, and I think that it shapes everything.
White privilege is probably the freedom to move through the world fearlessly in a way that black people cannot move through the world. That you can take advantage of opportunities with much less fear and an assumption that you'll be treated equally with all other white people.
Part of it is not having to even think about it. And so in a way, it's sort of like the privilege of having that space in your mind free to think about other things and be concerned about other things. So it's not even having to think about race is part of the privilege.
White privilege is being able to walk into a department store and not be followed by the detective.
We're going to go into this goodie bag of white privilege and all the goodies that white people get. This conversation about white privilege always goes into their little, the admitted white supremacist Peggy McIntosh. How does she describe it? The invisible knapsack. Is that what we're going to talk about? The invisible knapsack of white privilege. Why not talk about what made white privilege possible? What empowers white privilege? Let's discuss that. Let's get to the root of the problem. Let's see how long it takes.
A friend of mine who's Asian American, she was very unfairly treated at a department store. She was at a cosmetics counter, and she had bought something and it came with a free gift. So the woman at the counter put the free gift in the bag, and my friend didn't know that the free gift had already been put in the bag, so she had grabbed the one on the counter and put it in the bag unknowingly. This is the sweetest woman, wouldn't hurt a fly. And they called the cops on her, and she was taken to jail and arrested. I put myself in the same position that she was at, and I know there's no way I would have been arrested. I know I would not have been arrested.
It's the assumption that when you go to buy a car that you're going to have the money. Well, it's the assumption that when you go into a real estate office looking for a place to rent, unless you wear raggedy clothes, it's that you're going to want to go into this nice neighborhood.
You basically get to say what you want to, be any way you want to. You get privilege. You don't have to work as hard. You can slack off in jobs and still get promoted and still not have to worry about somebody coming after you. So whiteness to me is about privilege and access to information systems and people and power that you didn't earn.
I went through a time where I was poor and I had to take care of my father, and I worked with about 100 African American men, and I was the only white male on the shop floor. And I was really horrible at this job. It was a metal grinder. I'd grind too much of it. I'd make big indentations. I was constantly messing up, and I was sure I was going to get fired. It was just a matter of time. And about 6 months into the job, the boss and a few of the managers come over. They're all white men. And I thought, this is it. This is the day I'm getting fired. And they came over and told me that they've had their eye on me and they think that I'm management material. I said, what? Yeah. And they said, yeah, you stick around for a while and we think you've got potential to be a manager here.
Did you see his face? He couldn't believe it.
It's all embedded.
I bet you he took that job. I bet you he took that promotion over those black males. He didn't say, hey, Leroy over here, he's been doing a great job. He's the one who trained me. Why can't he have the promotion? I think I need a little more work. No, I bet he took that job.
In every piece of our country, it's embedded in every structure that we have. It's embedded in our economics. It's embedded everywhere.
When I walk into a bank, or when I walk into anybody's neighborhood, or when I walk into anybody's store, that I'm acceptable, that I can go anywhere I want, and I'm seen as an acceptable person. And the reason I am acceptable is because I'm white.
I remember when I was going to get my driver's license renewed for the first time. I really couldn't see very much without glasses. I didn't have any glasses with me. They had you go to one of these machines you look in and see like what letter it is and etc. I couldn't see any of it. I was one of the few white people there. And the guy behind the desk was this older white guy. And he just said, oh, don't worry about it, go ahead. I was like, is he just letting everybody through? And I saw that he wasn't. And I kind of was like, oh, okay.
It's the ability.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is what we're doing. We're letting the white people through. He let me through because I'm white. I bet he went ahead and got that driver's license. I bet you he didn't snitch. Did he snitch? Did he tell him, hey, Mr. Manager and Miss Manager, I want to report some suspected racist behavior. Yeah, the guy let me through. I know I failed my test. I don't deserve to be out here driving on the roads, endangering people with my poor eyesight. But he let me through anyway, and I think it's because I'm white. We should do something about this type of behavior. I don't think he did that, did he? Yeah. So we're talking about this invisible knapsack still, right? These goodies that white people claim that they get, but they didn't earn them. These unearned benefits. But yet we see a pattern of behavior where they actually do things to help maintain the system. And these are just the smaller things that they do. We're not even discussing political policies that they support that outright promote a white supremacist structure, the maintenance of white supremacy. We're not even discussing denying black people their ability to vote. We're not even discussing police brutality and those type of things where they're denying even investigating clear-cut cases of white supremacy and law enforcement. We're not going to discuss those things. Let's talk about the petty privileges that they get, but they are earned. Don't believe the hype. I would suggest not believing anything white people say without doing thorough research. But that's just me.
To walk into the bank in Savannah when we were ready to build our house.
We're still doing this
and
now.
borrow $100,000, and neither one of us were working. I mean, that to me, that is just so incredible that we could do that. I mean, of course we had to present, we had to give them facts and figures and all that kind of thing. But, if you were a person of color and you walked in and you said, well, we're neither working and they're going to loan you $100,000, I don't think so.
She's all smiling. Look at her smile. She got away with that.
Simple things. I mean, from everything from the ease of getting a bank loan to knowing that I can drive just about anywhere in the city and not get stopped because of my color by the police.
When I drive down the road and I get pulled over by a police officer, it's probably because either I've broken the law or I'm getting a flat tire and the police officer's going to tell me I'm getting a flat tire.
Well, when I get pulled over, I don't get tickets, I'm a white woman, middle class, in a minivan. I get pulled over all the time for speeding. And it's almost become a joke. And then, you know,
It's
the
a
police
joke.
officers apologized to me for pulling me over, you know, and I know if I was a person of color, you know, that wouldn't happen, you know. I know that I would be pulled over a lot more if I was a person of color because I speed every day.
They enjoy it. They enjoy their white power. They enjoy it so much that I don't think they're going to voluntarily give it up. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get any help from these individuals or members of the white team in general when it comes to replacing white supremacy with justice. Because even just look at the way they speak about these experiences, they know came about due to the system of white supremacy. They know, but they do their part. They play their role to maintain the system, and they do it happily. If I got to get that job, that promotion, if I got to get that driver's license, even though I could be killing someone out here with my poor eyesight, if I could get that $100,000 to build a house, I'm going to take it. Darkies be damned. I'm going to take it. And I'm going to smile about it when I recount the story.
And so I get stopped, they look at my license, and then they let me go, you know?
I've experienced whiteness
What is
on the
whiteness?
3 occasions that I've been pulled over by law enforcement driving a car.
That's
One
fine.
time I ran a red light, it's turning red, right? Another time I was speeding, another time I had a headlight out. And every single time I got off with a warning. I never got a ticket for any of those things. It was privilege and whiteness, therefore, that helped get me off. And I think for the average person, it would be whiteness that would allow me not to even have to think about why. I could get away and thinking, oh, I sweet-talked my way out of that. I did, but I was aided by the fact that I'm white.
They're not gonna do a body check on me. They're not gonna rip my car apart looking for a reason to haul me in. I'm not profiled. That's
They're not
white
gonna treat you
privilege.
like you're non-white. That's what
Basically, when I go to city council or county commission, I expect my representatives to take me seriously, and they do for the most part, because they know that they have to be more accountable to the white community, because the white community has more power and money and can vote them out of office.
There it is. They have power. They have power. Not even just the money. They have power. They'll not just vote you out of office. They'll try to get you out of office while chanting to hang you in the public square while they raid a Capitol building just because they lost an election type of power.
We as white people have a sense of what our rights are, that we have the right to, live well, live safely, have health care and police that respond to us, have city officials that pay attention to us, have, the needs of our community, be able to have those met. And
Wait a minute. Did she just say white people have a sense of knowing what their rights are as if non-white people don't know their rights? Or, the hordes of people protesting and setting buildings on fire or disrupting public official meetings. And that doesn't say anything to her about non-white people being aware what their rights are. I think non-white people at least are aware enough to know that they should have the same rights, respect for their rights as white people do. And I think that's what it comes down to. White people have their rights respected. Non-white people do not. And I think she's aware of it, but apparently to her, we don't even know what rights we have. I'm just a ignorant Negro, so maybe I don't know. Maybe we don't know our rights. I'm still learning.
I think that if you talk to people of color or look at communities of color, that does not exist for people. That idea of those rights.
The more I know, the more it's like, I've really got to talk about privilege here. Even though, I mean, I faced a lot of shit in my life. I mean, I really had all this stuff happen, but I still had whiteness in a way that's given me all this stuff.
And it's all these things which not only give you privilege in the sense of stuff and access to stuff, but also it validates who you are. You know, so you have this feeling that, you know, I'm important, I'm worthwhile, that other people don't have. You know, they have to get it somewhere else. You know, they might get it from their family or what have you, but I'm going to get it from everyone, you know, with few exceptions.
I was taught that you respected black folk, but not really as human beings, more like cats and dogs and cows. You wouldn't mistreat a cat or a dog in my family, and you wouldn't mistreat a black person.
Wait a minute. Isn't that mistreatment in itself? I was taught to respect black people, but more like animals. They're not humans at all. Isn't that a form of mistreatment? Well, I think it does illustrate one aspect of white supremacy. I mean, we tend to think that because some white people are nice in our faces, they do things for us, they allow us to have things, that we have white friends. But it's kind of like the relationship between people and dogs. You see white people, I know you've seen white people and their dogs and how they become quite intimate with their dogs. I mean, they'll put clothes on them and they'll feed them. They'll sleep with them. They'll even share dinner with them. They let the dog lick them in the face. Even, I don't want to go there, but they cry when the dog dies. You know, they really heartbroken when the dog passes away. You know, they say the dog is man's best friend. It wasn't even a woman that was man's best friend. It was a dog. But it was still a master-servant relationship between the human and the dog. The dogs have zero rights outside of that which people decide they want to allow dogs to have. And that is the relationship between white people and non-white people. I think it's a pretty clear parallel. The only difference is I think it's legal for them to marry and mate with us. Legal. I didn't say, I won't go there. But that is the parallel. Let me know if you have noticed this parallel or if you agree or disagree. You know, VGQ. What about white supremacy?
I don't have any trouble admitting that I'm a racist. I think it's absurd to try to fight with that. I grew up in this society. I was conditioned by it. I think internally in my psyche I have grounded and rooted those attitudes, and I see it in me all the time. I mean, I'm always dealing with it. I don't think that makes me a bad person. You know, I don't think that means that I've grounded in original sin or anything. It just means I've been well indoctrinated. But it does also call me to do something about it.
I consider myself somebody who does racist things and acts on the racism I have within me because of the context of the world in which I grew up and live in.
For me, individually, to recognize and acknowledge that I have the power of race in me, and that I'm going to be, I don't believe I'll ever have a time when I look at anybody and don't see their racial classification first.
Oh, I hate to admit it, but I still have thoughts that I'm smarter than some black people just because of skin color. I mean, I'm sorry, but that still crosses my mind.
Stereotypes will pop in my head just like everybody else, you know. When I see somebody, a stereotype will pop up, and then I have to say, no, you know, that's a prejudice.
When I'm in a classroom of students, I'll tend to look at the white students more than I'll look at the black students. And when I realized I was doing that, I was shocked. And I tried immediately to begin to train myself to stop doing that. And it was astonishingly difficult. There was something about a natural tendency to look at white faces in a way that I did not have the same natural tendency to look at black faces. And I think that's a kind of an ingrained, inborn racism.
Yeah. Racism is taught. No one's born racist. We've heard this before. But how does that change the fact that we have to end white supremacy and produce a system of justice? This lady, and I use that term loosely, is a teacher or was an educator who had direct influence over the minds of non-white children. This suspected white supremacist lorded over non-white children in the class and ignored them, unless, because there are studies that show that she's not the only one. She's not. Most white teachers ignore the non-white children in the classroom. I've discussed this in previous videos. Look at the videos on how racism affects education, or how white supremacy affects the educational system. We discussed that not only do white teachers tend to ignore even gifted non-white children for the sake of non-gifted white children, but there are studies that also demonstrate when teachers look up to scan around the classroom for misbehavior, that'll be the only time they ignore the white children to look at the non-white children, when they're looking for misbehavior. The white children and the non-white children could be doing the exact same actions, and the teacher will zero in on the non-white children to punish them. That is the dangers of sending our offspring to these institutions to be educated by people like her. And that is why I chose to homeschool my offspring. So I will look into it. If you have the options, maybe get together with other non-white people, other parents, attempted parents who are homeschooling their offspring, and see what options you may have, because you don't know the psychological damage that your children are undergoing at the hands of a lady like this. And they are everywhere. Everywhere.
Is all I can think of it as.
I remember I was talking with a young man named Sylvester, and he was saying, "You're racist." And I'm going, "I'm not." He's going, "You are." "I'm not." You know, we went back and forth like that for a while. And then I had to go get refreshments. So I said, "Hold on." And I went upstairs, and my mother turned to me and she said, "Get a grip on yourself. You know, you're a white young girl. You've grown up in the racist society. You're racist. Deal with it. Move on."
That's interesting. Deal with it and move on. In what way? And what is she supposed to do now that she can admit that she's racist? We've had a number of different responses to this question. What about prejudice and racism? That is the question that showed up on the screen, but they're all answering the question as if it was, how do you respond to being called a racist? And we got one guy who says he doesn't mind. He admits he's a racist. Another one who says, I do racist things. I have racist attitudes. But he stops short of calling himself a racist. You have another one who refused to call himself a racist. You have different levels of responses to these questions. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it after you've made this admission? Now, I would like to point out, according to the code, Mr. Neely Fuller suggests that non-white people do not call anyone a racist or a white supremacist. They are either a suspected racist, suspected white supremacist, or an admitted racist or an admitted white supremacist. And I think part of the reason for this logic is that many non-white people are psychologically conditioned to protect white people, so that if you are calling a suspect racist or referring to them as racist or white supremacist, that will cause other victims to go into defense mode and protect the white person, even if it means attacking you. And we don't want conflict between non-white people. We want to minimize confusion, and we want to minimize conflict between victims of white supremacy.
But that was, that was an amazing gift that my mother gave me, because it allowed me to turn all of my defensiveness about it into, oh, well, maybe I am.
And then what?
Racism and prejudice are very different things. And all of us have grown up with prejudices. Some of us have prejudice against people of color, some people have prejudice against white people, and some of us are downright awful about it.
Because so much of the focus is on personal prejudices. That's how I think a large part of the U.S. population analyzes race matters, is between different groups of people.
Well, I think it works the same way. If black people feel that white people can be racist towards them, I don't see any difference between a black person being racist towards a white person.
In high school, the high school I attended was probably 60% black, 40% white. And
here we go.
Being white and in a majority black class, I was picked on and teased for that.
What we have here is what the code refers to as victim blaming, essentially. This is what we have. Blaming non-white people for their response to being victimized in a system of white supremacy. That's why the suspects tend to use terms such as bias, prejudice, discrimination, or even, what's the other term that they like to use a lot? They'll say racist only when it applies to everyone. They'll give you a definition that is very vague and very broad so that it includes any and every person. But that's not how the system of white supremacy works. And that is why they seldomly use the terms system and white supremacy together, because that tells you exactly who is doing what, who the targets are, and even implies how things are being done, or at least to what end. But I didn't think we were going to get through this documentary without there being some form of victim blaming and some form of, woe, it's me, I'm a racist, but everyone else is racist too. What did the lady say that time?
I feel I am a racist. But every black that calls Whitey a Whitey is also a racist.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's to be expected.
Sometimes you come across people that feel because of what had happened in the past that we're held responsible. I'm 30 years old. I wasn't around when that was happening.
I know what it feels like to be subjected to anger for something that I personally never did.
What was it in the past that he was referring to that happened that he wasn't around for? Is he referring to slavery? Because as far as I'm concerned, formal slavery ended in 1863, 65, when is Juneteenth? But then there was black people who were still enslaved and didn't know until into the 1900s. When did slavery actually end? Formally, anyways. But even informally, we essentially still enslaved today. So, and I'm pretty sure he plays his role in maintaining the status quo system of white supremacy. That's one way I look at it whenever I hear these suspects say things like, oh, I've never enslaved anyone. I wasn't around during that time, and neither were you. So let's get over it. It would be easy to get over it if you weren't continuing to mistreat us till this day. But I digress a little bit. Let's just go back to the documentary.
If we're in the wrong place sometimes, it's obvious that we're in the wrong place, we're the wrong color to be in that place, you'll hear a comment, you'll hear some things that's not so nice that you would never think that you would hear. You're a little too white to be in this neighborhood.
When I was teaching, I was not privileged because I had to interact with a lot of stereotypes about white people, and I had to deal with them on that level, but I was privileged in the sense that I got the job in the first place.
Racial white sacrifice confusion.
I think that one of the key things to understand about racism is, like Malcolm X said, racism is like a Cadillac. There's a new model every year, and it's racism is a dynamic social construction, so it's always changing, it's always mutating. So people that say, well, there's no racism anymore, they're referring to racism as it existed in, 1950 or 1920 or 1910.
Racism permeates every aspect of our society, and it's made, a world that we live in that's very unequal.
It isn't what you personally did or did not do. And I think that's such a hard leap for white people to make, is like, it isn't something that I personally did, but it's something I personally have to work against.
It ain't just a matter of who I am as a person or what I think or feel about other people.
I think white supremacy is a team sport, so it's not just about individuals. It's the individuals who make up the team. But this is just like if you were a part of a criminal organization, if you were a part of the mafia, and you know what the mafia is known for doing. You know they've committed crimes. You know that essentially is a criminal organization. If you as an individual decide that you want to be a part of that, and then you go through your initiation process and you get accepted, and now you're operating as an agent of that organization, you become culpable for everything that the organization has done, even things that existed before your physical individual presence, because you're now part of the group. So when we discuss the group, the organization called white people, if you're a white person, you're a part of that group. So you just have to accept it. You have to take it for what it is. And that's not me giving any advice to white people. That's just the mentality I have when I deal with suspected racists who give me this manipulation. This is what I have to remind myself about them, that they're part of the group. They know what they are doing. And I should still be suspicious of this individual because they still identify as and operate as a white person in a system of white supremacy.
I think there's a hierarchy in our country that's based very clearly on skin color and on people's perceptions of what race you're in. And white are at the top and black are at the bottom, and Asian and Native American and people of sort of light brown hue are in the middle, and Latinos are down, and then blacks are at the bottom.
Racism is not simply about how we get along on an individual level, but it has to do with who has institutional and social power. White
People have the political and social power in our society, and that is a given. And if you look at if you pick apart social and political situations, you can see that very clearly. I think it's quite obvious.
What? Do any of these white people sound ignorant about racism? That they just don't understand what's going on? I don't know. I can't help you. I wish I could be more help, but I just don't understand. Black person, could you explain to me how racism works? With your expertise, could you help me be a better white person? Teach me to be not racist. Do these white people sound ignorant to you? They sound like experts to me. That's my opinion. That is my observation.
Whites get privilege and experience the advantage of being in a system that thinks white is better than folk of color, and so there's all this unearned advantage that's going on all the time.
Particularly in a society like the United States, it's hard to confront racism unless you understand how, if you're racialized as white, you benefit from racism.
Just because I am white and have these privileges, I participate in a racist system. And that doesn't it's not my fault. I can't help it. I'm born to it.
It is your fault.
And, and that's what being white means.
But I do think and assume that white privilege is in fact the kind of racism that you can't avoid.
All I got to do is sit down and close my eyes, and things are going to just move forward in white interests. And there's a way in which I'm complicit. I collude. I don't say anything. I don't do anything to stop it or challenge it.
I agree. I agree that white supremacy has been so refined as a system that most white people, they could just sit there and enjoy the fruits of their ancestors' labor to mistreat non-white people. And the system is going to continue as it has been continuing as of recent. But the issue is that non-white people do struggle against the system of white supremacy as best they can with what they have. So white people, in their best interest, operate against non-white people in the present day to maintain their position of power. So he is complicit. There's no, I don't do anything to deserve these goodies. They do their part. If you pay attention, read the news. I say read the news. Reading is more important than watching television, as Dr. Wilson will remind us. Peace to the grandsister. Read the news. You might catch some clips on, news, television, or whatever, but read. Read about racism and ask questions. Ask questions of white people. Ask them questions. And you will see that white people tend to understand how the system works far better than non-white people do. You will see the part that white people play when it comes to maintaining their power in the system. And hopefully, logic will dictate to you as it has to me that white people are not going to give up their power. They're not going to share it. They're not. And I think that's something that non-white people are going to have to accept, that getting constructive information from white people, if we're able to, will be the best that they will be able to help us as far as replacing white supremacy with justice.
And in that way, I really do think that's how racism works, and that's a way in which I'm racist. And the difference now is that I don't try and prove to anyone else or even to myself that I'm not racist. I sort of assume that, know that, and get on with doing anti-racist work as best I can.
I believe that the very depth of understanding racism is understanding that process of us becoming white, historically us becoming white, and exactly what does that mean to be white, and how much of our humanity that we've lost. Because I think that the only way that whites can truly regain our humanity that's lost to the degree to which we've bought into white is through doing anti-racism work in anything that we do.
I disagree. I think replacing a system of white supremacy with justice may redeem the humanity of those who classify themselves as white. I'm under the opinion that anti-racism, as it is mentioned by white people, should be the same as counter-racism, but it's not. I don't think it is. And even if it is, I think it's worth examining whether or not the two are the same. But even if anti-racism is the same as counter-racism, it's more important that non-white people should accept no less from white people than a successful end to white supremacy and the production of justice. As Mr. Fuller would say, you don't get paid for yardage. So talking about this anti-racism work that they're doing, it often reminds me of the abolitionists who were anti-slavery and still very anti-black. So while they helped to end formal slavery, they still practice white supremacy against our ancestors. Word to Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. If you read about their lives, if you read about their incidents, even with the anti-racists of the day, the abolitionists, you would see that they were able to claim to be doing anti-racist work, but yet they were still practicing white supremacy. And that is where I think anti-racism falls short. I think it will be much better that we, non-white people, accept no less from white people than an end to white supremacy and the production of justice. And then we will see what credit needs to be given to whom was helped, who we could call a friend or not. That is my opinion. What do you think? Let me know. What does this mean for white people doing anti-racist
Like a
work?
lot of people, you start to learn exactly how messed up our society is in terms of racial disparity, and you realize that you're in the privileged class, you know? And especially for me, being a queer feminist woman, I in no way wanted to identify myself with an oppressor society, an oppressor group.
But she does.
And that was really hard for me.
Calling myself white, that's been hard to actually say I'm a white person. It took longer than me recognizing that I was a white person, you know what I mean? Yeah. To go around and say I'm white.
Get comfortable with it.
Right, with that. Like I was aware that I was white, you know, through this whole process, but it's, you know, it's been a process of being able to say all the time, you know, I'm a white feminist.
It's taking the onion and it's unpeeling the onion, you know, of how racism permeates everything around us.
I am white.
Yes, we know.
I am, you know, middle class, English speaking, and seeing that as tools that I can use, and also claiming my identity communally as part of this white community, and seeing that, you know, the work that I need and want to be doing is in the white community.
What we have got to do is use the power that we have because of the privilege to kind of tear down those things in the system that hurt other people.
For me, I haven't been able to give up white privilege because you can't until the system is eradicated. It's going to be there. But by struggling against it, by fighting against it, by consciously making a decision to turn against it, I can release myself. I can say to myself, you know what, I'm still receiving these benefits and that's horrible, but at least I'm out there doing something about it. And so there's a sense of freedom. There's a sense of really claiming my humanity.
As a white person, I have.
He seems really eager to be patting himself on the back for a job that hasn't been completed yet, right? Even though the system hasn't ended, even though he hasn't been able to stop it, he's still going to pat himself on the back and say, job well done. That is why anti-racism falls short. And I think the solution is counter-racism. Now, I'm not usually one to say, hey, this way is the only way. And I'm not even ready to say that now, even about counter-racism. If someone has a better solution to the problem, I'm open. I'm open to hearing it out. I'm all open ears. But as of right now, counter-racism appears to be the best solution. Thank you, Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., for your work over the decades of bringing us the code. But yeah, white people, so-called white anti-racists, seem to be very eager to look like they're doing something to end the system of white supremacy so that they can pat themselves on the back and say, good job, guys, even though those non-white people are still catching hell from us, we did the best we could. It's not enough. If anything, all it does is causes more confusion amongst non-white people, amongst victims of white supremacy.
I have leverage. It's kind of funny because as a poor person, I never had leverage, but as a white person, I have leverage. And a woman, I didn't have much leverage either. But as a white person, I have leverage among other white people. They take what I say as being more valid. It doesn't seem self-interested to them.
I mean, I have connections with the judge. I have connections with the guy in the bank. I have connections everywhere with people that have power who can make decisions around policy, procedures, just all kinds of things. So at that level, I can use my influence.
What has been a challenge for me, and where my greatest challenges have been, is on how I can personally use the positions that I'm in to help to change the institutions in ways that make it possible for them to really be aligned with communities of color and accountable to communities of color.
How has that been working? White people using their so-called white privilege amongst those people in power. They are the people in power. White people could end white supremacy right now if they wanted to. What day is it? By the end of the day, if they wanted to, they can end white supremacy and produce a system of justice. Do you remember how they shut everything down when it came to COVID-19? They shut it down when it came to the vid. They shut everything down. Sports had to go. You couldn't even be within 6 feet of another person. Wife having a baby, you gotta have to watch from the other side of the hospital if need be, if we even let you in. You can't even leave outside your house to go down the block to get some groceries right now. You're quarantined, everybody. They shut it down because they were serious about doing something about the vid. If they were that serious about white supremacy, racism, it'd be over yesterday. It needs to be over last week, centuries ago. But they could end it right now if they wanted to, yet they're moving at this snail's pace. There's not enough white people out there who even talk like this, let alone who are serious about ending white supremacy, let alone who are in a position to do something about it, compared to the white people out there who are more than comfortable just sitting down, letting the system do what they do and do their little part to maintain and refine and expand the system. There's just not enough white people interested to changing things. Look around. Look at the institutions. What you're seeing is a regression. If there was ever any progress, what you're seeing is a regression of so-called diversity, which never actually worked anyway. It just looked like it worked, but it wasn't. White people are still in power. They're still in charge of the institutions. Those institutions are still made to the benefit of maintaining white supremacy for white people. So, but even on the surface, all these DEI offices being closed in institutions, it started with overturning affirmative action in the context of universities, and somehow it leapt into the labor fields and then other places. So it looks to me like these anti-racist white people aren't doing enough. They're not even doing enough to recruit more people like them, let alone doing enough to affect any constructive change in the system. What are your thoughts? Let me know.
And where people who come to work in those institutions can begin to come into them without feeling like they have to code switch or without feeling like they have to put on another persona in order to survive.
There's this whole world out there that I had no idea about. And as far as I can see, people of color, the ones that I have been close to, and the communities that I've been around.
Hold up. I know she's not over here crying. I know she's not sitting here recording the interview for the documentary, sitting here with them white woman tears. We supposed to feel empathy for her. We're supposed to think that she really means what she says when it comes to feeling empathy for non-white people. What is she weeping about, this weeping white woman right here? What is she sniffling about? I know I heard sniffles. I know I'm not tripping.
Have a lot more figured out about how to be human beings than white people do. I think because we're cast as oppressors, we've had to get rid of a lot of pieces of ourselves that are human, and it's deadened us to a lot. I mean, it's deadened our sympathies and our empathies and our heart to other people.
I think that not knowing that you come into this world with all this privilege makes us, doesn't make us good people in the sense that it doesn't make us, I take that back, doesn't make us the people we could be. It takes away from who we really are as true human beings when we start applying these
when you start benefiting from something that you didn't earn and you don't acknowledge and you don't do something about.
If you're going along with the status quo and you're not doing something to make change, you're part of the problem. And I think a lot of white people don't want to have that discussion. When we pretend that our school systems are okay and that the criminal justice system is okay and media depictions are okay, and we just go along with it, we are part of the problem.
If you're not part of the problem,
in this world, because it is set up for me and mine, and because the systems operate for my benefit, then I am perpetuating that system. I am letting it go on. And I am benefiting every day from it.
I was going to say, if you're not part of the problem as a white person, then where do you actually stand? I mean, it's a system of white supremacy. You're a white person. I mean, I get it. They're trying to appeal to other white people to adopt this same attitude and behavior towards being anti-racist. I get it, but from my perspective, it's just not enough. So, what do you think? Were we able to answer the questions of what it means to be a white person? And what about what white people talk about when no non-white people are around? Did you get any information that was of constructive value? Let me know. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns. And I suggest going to producejustice.com to pick up the code book by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. The code book and the word guide, if you have not done so already. If you find this work constructive, please subscribe, like, and share, as well as you can go to CashApp, $JustaVOR, to donate funds that will help me continue to make more videos in the future. In the meantime, I'm JustaVOR. I'm still learning. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Let me say something that gets to the very crux of the matter, and this may be offensive for some to hear who are not on the side that we're on. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.
Say that again.
Let me say it one more time for those of you who didn't hear me. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.